The most famous woman in Chinese history is probably Emperor Wu Zetian. She was the only woman to declare herself as emperor and successfully rule China for 15 years. After Wu Zetian, other women of the Tang Dynasty also tried to take the throne, and one of the women who came closest was Empress Zhang. Hey everyone, I'm Amy. Today we're telling the story of Empress Zhang, who was the empress of the Tang Dynasty during the chaotic years of the Anlushan Rebellion. Before the rebellion began, the Tang Dynasty was ruled by Emperor Xuanzong. He was considered by many to be one of the greatest emperors of the Tang Dynasty because he stabilized the empire after the turmoil following the fall of Wu Zetian. But the later years of his reign were marked by famine and corruption. Then his own son declared himself emperor and created a world with two emperors. And through this mess, Empress Zhang helped hold the empire together and managed a divided imperial court. She kept the government running and became one of the most powerful people in the empire until it all fell apart in one final gamble. Empress Zhang's personal name was not preserved in historical records. Some modern stories today refer to her as Zhang Liangdi, but Liangdi was not her name. Instead, it was the consort rank that she held. We don't know much about her early life. She was born around the 720s, and sometime in the 740s, she was married into the household of Emperor Xuanzong's own son, Crown Prince Li Hen, as a consort. She was described as eloquent and wise, beautiful, and she always knew how to resolve problems for her husband without even being asked. Basically, she was really smart and also had a really high EQ. But Li Yizhang did not start as the crown prince's primary wife. Li Hen's primary wife was Crown Princess Wei. But in 746, Crown Princess Wei's family was caught in a political scandal, and Li Hen divorced her in order to distance himself from the situation. With Crown Princess Wei gone, Lady Zhang eventually became the Crown Prince's favorite consort, and in 753, she gave birth to a son, Li Shao. Then, 2 years later, everything changed. In December of the year 755, a general named An Lushan turned his armies against the Tang Dynasty and began the terrible An Lushan Rebellion. As the rebel army marched closer to Chang'an, Emperor Xuanzong fled the city with his closest family members and attendants. The crown prince and a pregnant Lady Zhang went with them, along with around 3,000 soldiers. The plan was to go southwest into the mountains of Shu, where the terrain would protect them. But they didn't get far. The soldiers were not happy that the court was abandoning the capital. They felt that everything wrong with the empire was because of corrupt officials and the influence of the emperor's favorite consort, noble consort Yang. When they made a stop at Ma Wei station, the soldiers turned on the people that they were escorting and killed the corrupt officials traveling with them, along with the noble consort Yang. The emperor couldn't stop them. And this moment of weakness for the emperor changed something within Crown Prince Li Hen. For his entire life, Li Hen had lived in fear and awe of his father. But here, in this moment, all Li Hen saw was an old man, a weak man, who let his favorite consort die because a few thousand soldiers told him to. After the killings, the soldiers continued their escort, and as they reached the Wei River, they were stopped by the local people. They recognized the imperial banners and begged them to help, to go back and save Chang'an. But Emperor Xuanzong was still in shock over his soldiers' mutiny and the death of his beloved consort. He did not want to deal with this. The people asked the crown prince to stay and guide them, but Li Hen refused, saying that he needed to help his father. A eunuch named Li Jingzhong then suggested to Li Hen that maybe he could stay behind and gather the nearby soldiers, and that there were more soldiers to the northwest. Lady Zhang immediately supported the proposal. She believed that staying in the northwest gave the crown prince his best chance to save the empire. So the crown prince sent word to the emperor about his plan, who gave his permission, and the imperial party was split into two. The emperor continued towards Shu, and the crown prince, his consort, his son, and about 2,000 men turned north. They had just 2,000 soldiers in a country full of rebel cavalry. The rebels already held the capital. Nobody knew which towns had surrendered and which had not. And every night, when the group stopped to sleep, Lady Zhang put herself between the crown prince and the door. Li Hen did not understand it and asked her, "Defending against enemies is not a woman's responsibility. Why are you putting yourself in front?" And she answered him, "Right now, your highness is crossing hard and dangerous ground, and there are not many guards with us. If something sudden happens, I will meet it myself, allowing your highness to escape from behind so that you won't be harmed." During the flight north, many officials still did not know if following the crown prince was the right choice. But Lady Zhang never wavered. She supported her husband at every major decision, working alongside the soldiers and shared the hardships of the journey. And Lady Zhang became one of the only people that Li Hen completely trusted. The crown prince's party reached the city of Lingwu in August of 756. Lingwu was a garrison city to the northwest, at the edge of the desert. And it was also the headquarters of the Shuofang army, an imperial border army primarily responsible for protecting the northern borders. The main army itself had marched east to fight the rebels. And what remained at Lingwu were the officials who handled administration and the supplies for the Shuofang army. These officials had a problem. With Emperor Shenzong fleeing further to the west, the chain of command for the empire had become greatly disrupted. Orders took weeks to arrive, if they arrived at all. And just when the people needed to see a show of strength from the leadership of the empire, what they saw instead was an emperor who abandoned the capital and retreated far from the conflict, leaving the people behind. To many of the officials at Lingwu, the Tang Dynasty needed a stronger ruler who was still here and still making a stand against the rebellion. So, after the crown prince arrived, two officials of the Shuofang army, Pei Mian and Du Hongjian, submitted a formal petition asking him to take the throne. But Li Hen refused, insisting that his father was still alive and still the emperor. So, they submitted the petition again. This time, they argued, the soldiers that followed you are all from Guanzhong, around the capital. They want to go home. The only reason that they're here is because they want to make a difference. If their hearts scatter, then there would be no hope to gather them again. We beg your highness to please consider the will of the many and make the right decision for the dynasty. But Li Hen refused again. Throughout these debates, Lady Zhang consistently encouraged the crown prince to remain in the northwest and continue resisting the rebellion. And finally, after 5 petitions, the crown prince relented and declared himself the new emperor of the Tang Dynasty. He would be known in history as Emperor Suzong. But an empire cannot have 2 emperors. So a messenger was sent to Emperor Shenzong to inform him of what had happened. Emperor Shenzong was shocked and furious when he heard the news. But he also knew that openly condemning his son would split the empire while the rebellion was still going on. So a few days later, he yielded the position of emperor to his son and named himself retired emperor. But he demanded to still be kept in the loop on all imperial decisions and promised to retire after the capitals were reclaimed. Not long after they arrived at Lingwu, Lady Zhang gave birth to their second son, Li Dong. 3 days later, she got up and started sewing clothes for the soldiers. While many officials served the new court through memorials and debate, Lady Zhang served it through action. When the emperor asked her to rest, she said, "This is not the time for me to be looking after myself. Your Majesty's business must be attended to first." She had been brave on the road. She had protected her husband on their journey, and she was taking care of the soldiers. She was gaining the respect and the loyalty of the people around her. After Emperor Suzong took the throne, he elevated her to the position of pure consort, which was one of the highest consort ranks below empress, and they started to rebuild the Tang Dynasty imperial court. Lady Zhang has supported the emperor's most difficult decisions, shared the hardships of the campaign, and earned the respect of many people around him. Lady Zhang held no official office, but she was now almost always near the emperor. while officials debated state affairs in the audience hall, she often remained just behind the curtains or in an adjoining chamber, close enough for Emperor Suzong to hear her opinions. Lady Zhang's influence at court was beginning to grow. But it wasn't just her influence. The emperor's eldest son, Li Chu, was appointed marshal of the empire's armies, giving him overall authority over the military campaign to reclaim the capital. And the eunuch Li Jingzhong was placed in charge of the marshal's administrative office, putting him at the center of military appointments, reports, and supplies. Li Jingzhong has started out as a stable servant, and he has spent years running errands in the crown prince's household. Years of loyal service during the family's darkest days had earned him the emperor's complete trust. And as a sign of his trust, the emperor granted him a new name, Li Fuguo, which means assistant to the state. Li Fuguo understood that power at court could disappear as quickly as it appeared. If he wanted to keep his position, he needed an ally who had the emperor's complete confidence, and Lady Zhang, as the emperor's favorite consort, became his obvious choice. Together, they formed a partnership that would dominate the imperial court. Between them, they controlled two of the most important things in the imperial court. Li Fuguo controlled who and what could reach the emperor, and Lady Zhang increasingly influenced the decisions he made. But not everyone welcomed this new partnership. Emperor Suzong's third son, Li Tan, became concerned with their growing power and influence, and he started warning his father about them. But Emperor Suzong trusted Lady Zhang and Li Fuguo completely. He dismissed his son's warnings and took no action against them. After reorganizing at Lingwu, the new imperial court couldn't stay here for long. Their goal was to retake Chang'an, and they had to gradually make their way south in order to better fight the war. In October of 756, the court moved southeast to Shunhua, and it was there that an issue of money came up. The Tang Dynasty had lost most of the north to the rebellion, and they were running low on money and supplies for their soldiers. A close advisor of the emperor named Li Bi saw that Lady Zhang had a beautiful saddle inlaid with 7 gems. It was a gift from the retired emperor. Li Bi suggested that the saddle be broken apart so that the gems could be given to the soldiers as a reward. Prince Li Tan thought it was a good idea and supported it. But Lady Zhang was listening from an adjoining chamber behind a partition. Hearing the discussion, she spoke out against the suggestion. Maybe she felt that she had to keep something for herself. Or maybe she just didn't want to agree with Prince Li Tan. But this time, Emperor Suzong did not agree with her and immediately ordered the saddle to be dismantled. And Lady Zhang never forgave Prince Li Tan for what happened. So what began as a disagreement over a saddle soon turned into a struggle over who the emperor could trust. The next month, in November, the court moved further south to Penyuan. Prince Li Tan continued to warn his father that Lady Zhang and the eunuch Li Fuguo were becoming too powerful. He was concerned that they were building their own networks and slowly taking control of the imperial court for personal gains. And then Lady Zhang and Li Fuguo responded with a petition of their own. They told the emperor, the Prince Li Tan is resentful that he did not receive military command, and he is harboring treasonous ambitions. Considering that Emperor Suzong himself had become emperor while his own father was still alive, this was an accusation that he took very seriously. He knew better than anyone how quickly extraordinary circumstances could overturn the normal order of succession. So he chose to believe these accusations and ordered his own son to die. Lady Zhang had won her first great political battle, and that was the moment the people around Emperor Suzong realized just how dangerous Lady Zhang had become. Even the eldest prince, Li Chu, became frightened. He asked Li Bi what he should do. Li Bi told the prince to be a filial son, stay patient, give way when necessary, and she would not come after him. In March of 757, the court moved southeast again to Fengxiang. Fengxiang was just to the west of Chang'an and would become the forward base for the imperial forces campaign to retake the capitals. For the next several months, reinforcements arrived from across the empire, and allied troops joined the campaign. And in November, the imperial forces finally took back the capital city, Chang'an. As the marshal of the empire's armies, the eldest prince, Li Chu, became a hero. But Lady Zhang was worried about how much prestige Li Chu had gained. In order to secure her own position in the court, she really wanted her own son to become crown prince. But her own son, Li Shao, was only 4 years old. If Li Shao had any chance of becoming the crown prince, then Li Chu had to be removed. So she began to spread rumors that Li Chu now held the heart of the people and that he would replace his father as the new emperor. It was the same strategy that had worked against Prince Li Tan. But this time, Li Bi tried to stop her. He went to the emperor and started the conversation about the deceased Li Tan, and the emperor said, "Li Tan was my beloved son. He was brave and decisive, and he gave real service during times of hardship. Do you think I did not know that?" But he was misled by malicious schemers. He wanted to harm his brother and take the succession. So I had no choice but to remove him. But Li Bi said that those were simply words of slander. Li Bi replied that if Prince Li Tan had truly wanted to murder his brother, then Prince Li Chu should have hated him. But the opposite was true. Every time Li Chu spoke of his younger brother, he broke down in tears. And then he told the emperor about a poem. He said that in the past, Heavenly Empress Wu Zetian had 4 sons. The eldest son was the crown prince Hong. The empress was planning to take power herself, and she hated how clever he was, so she poisoned him. She then made her second son, Li Xian, the heir. But Li Xian was afraid, and he wrote the Melon Song of Yellow Terrans, hoping to move the empress. The Melon Song warned that internal strife and the purging of imperial sons would ultimately lead to complete ruin. It says, "We planted melons below the yellow terrace, and when the melons ripened, the fruit hung thick. Pick 1, and the melons are better for it. Pick 2, and the melons grow sparse. Pick 3, and you might still manage. Pick 4, and you carry home the bare vine." But unfortunately, Empress Wu Zetian did not listen, and Li Xian died in exile. Without directly mentioning Lady Zhang by name, Li Bi was clearly comparing her actions to what Empress Wu Zetian did. And then Li Bi told the emperor, "Your Majesty has already picked once. Be careful not to pick again." It was a warning about what Lady Zhang was trying to do. Li Bi asked the emperor to please remember this poem and to please think about his words. He knew that it was no longer safe for him here at court. After what he just told the emperor, Lady Zhang would certainly come after him next. So Li Bi retired from the court. He said that he wanted to spend the rest of his life in the mountains. Li Chu begged him not to go, but Li Bi left anyways. And the rumors did not stop. But Prince Li Chu remembered Li Bi's advice. He did not fight Lady Zhang. He gave way whenever he could, and he waited. In December of 757, the imperial court of Emperor Suzong returned to the capital city, Chang'an. The heart of the Tang Dynasty was finally back where it was supposed to be. And a few weeks after that, retired Emperor Shenzong also returned to the capital from Shu. Emperor Suzong went out to meet his father on the road. The son bowed. Both men wept. The people watching along the road wept with them. But even though the reunion was emotional, the retired emperor's return was actually under armed escort. His personal guard was disarmed, and he was taken directly to Xinqing Palace, where he had lived before the rebellion. He had promised that once the capital were recovered, he would officially retire and never involve himself in government again. The capitals were recovered now, but he did not really retire. He didn't actively try to seize power from his son, and it is said that many of his days were spent in deep sorrow, mourning the death of his beloved noble consort Yang. But he had ruled the empire for over 40 years, and many officials of the court still went to him first, out of habit. And through them, he continued issuing decrees, making appointments, and granting rewards. Maybe he was just reliving the past that he couldn't let go. But regardless of his actual intentions, the retired emperor effectively created a rival court at Xingqing Palace. And Emperor Suzong could not allow that. He had to begin dismantling his father's court, so he removed many of the chancellors and officials that his father had appointed, and replaced them with his own. But retired Emperor Shenzong's influence remained. The Tang Dynasty now had 2 emperors living in 2 palaces in the same city. And everybody at court had to decide which one they answered to. But there was one decision that Emperor Suzong made that could not be challenged. In May of 758, he named Lady Zhang his empress. She was now the highest position that a woman could hold in the Tang Dynasty. The empress ran the inner palace. She received the wives of officials in formal audiences, and she led the silkworm ceremony. But her responsibilities were mostly ceremonial and not functional. She wanted more. She needed something more real. Because even with her favor and position as empress, she could not control who would become crown prince. Later that year, the emperor named Prince Li Chu as his crown prince and gave him a new name, Li Yu. Despite everything she had done, her own son had not become the heir. So she looked for another way to secure her power, and she gradually involved herself more and more in state affairs. With the eunuch Li Fuguo's help, she already had control over who could reach the emperor, what reports he received, and whose requests were heard first. But now, in a court divided between 2 emperors and often with competing orders, many decisions could no longer move through the normal bureaucracy. Empress Zhang became one of the few people who could navigate both sides to make things happen. She carried petitions. She settled disputes. She understood both emperors. She knew how to persuade her husband, and she knew how to negotiate with the retired emperor's supporters. The officials learned that if they wanted something done, they needed to convince Empress Zhang first. And once that became the normal way of doing business, Empress Zhang and Li Fuguo quickly became 2 of the most powerful people at court. Many officials did not like how much influence they held and believed that Empress Zhang's involvement added to political instability. But whether they like it or not, many officials depended on Empress Zhang and Li Fuguo to keep the government running. Eventually, Emperor Suzong found out what Empress Zhang and Li Fuguo were doing. But it was too late, and he could no longer control them. In early 759, Empress Zhang suggested to court officials that she could be named Yi Shen, which basically meant to support the emperor. It was an honorific that recognized the role she was already playing in government, a way of saying that the emperor did not rule alone. This was possibly inspired by Empress Wu Zetian, who had ruled alongside her husband, Emperor Gaozong, as one of the 2 sages. But the chancellor, Li Kui, opposed the request, arguing that no such title should be granted. And before it could be discussed further, a lunar eclipse appeared in the sky. It was an omen that something had gone wrong. And the matter of Empress Zhang's new honorific was dropped. And then things got even worse for the empress. In July of 760, Empress Zhang's eldest son, Li Shao, passed away. He was 7 years old. It was a devastating tragedy for Empress Zhang. But many officials at court quietly breathed a sign of relief. Because with Li Shao gone, and her second son, Li Dong, still only a small child, the immediate struggle over the position of the crown prince was over. By August of 760, Empress Zhang and the eunuch Li Fuguo had great control over the court. but keeping retired Emperor Shenzong in the Xinqing Palace was becoming too politically dangerous. The Xinqing Palace was separate from the main Daming Palace, and large crowds would gather outside of it in support of the retired emperor. Even though many people blamed the disaster of the rebellion on him, he was still greatly revered and remained extremely popular. Empress Zhang and eunuch Li Fuguo had been keeping a close eye on what was happening at Xinqing Palace and persuaded Emperor Suzong that it was time to move the old emperor out of the public eye. Li Fuguo went to see retired Emperor Shenzong with an imperial order inviting him to move into the Western Palace, which was previously known as the Taiji Palace. Unlike Xinqing Palace, the Western Palace lay behind the main palace walls. Access was tightly controlled by the imperial guards, and ordinary officials would no longer easily see the old emperor, and common people could no longer gather outside of where he was staying. After moving the old emperor, his household was dismantled, and his closest attendants were also moved or reassigned to other responsibilities. Gao Lishi, who was retired Emperor Shenzong's most trusted eunuch, was exiled, and General Chen Xuanli, who had personally guarded the old emperor through the rebellion, was forced into retirement. But it turns out that it was not with Emperor Suzong's permission at all, and the imperial order was forged. The retired emperor was deeply unhappy living in the Western Palace, and his health rapidly declined. He repeatedly asked to see his son, but all of his requests were denied. When Emperor Suzong found out about his father's situation, he cried. But then he said that Empress Zhang controlled these matters, and that he could not visit his father unless she agreed. By then, Empress Zhang had become so powerful that even the emperor didn't want to oppose her. He was afraid of his empress. This was Empress Zhang's solution. If she could not wield power directly, then she only needed to control the people who did. But wanting power did not necessarily mean she did not love her husband. In early 761, Emperor Suzong fell seriously ill. He became bedridden and was rarely well enough to hold court. To pray for his recovery, Empress Zhang cut her own finger and used her blood to transcribe a Buddhist sutra. At the time, this was one of the greatest acts of personal sacrifice, performed in the hope of gaining spiritual merit to heal the sick and to extend the life of a loved one. We don't know if it was genuine devotion or political theater, but everyone in the palace saw it. By the spring of 762, Emperor Suzong had been ill for over a year. The crown prince, Li Yu, was already handling much of the government in his father's name, and the partnership that had ruled the court was beginning to fall apart. Empress Zhang and the eunuch Li Fuguo had been on the same page since that day at Ma Wei in 756. For years, everything they had gained came from the fact that their goals were aligned. But now their paths were starting to diverge. Li Fuguo commanded the capital's military forces and would remain useful even to the next emperor. But Empress Zhang's position was different. All of her power depended on maintaining her influence over the succession and the next emperor, and her relationship with the crown prince was hardly a good one. To make matters worse, her younger son, Li Dong, also died around this time. With both of her sons gone, Empress Zhang no longer had a candidate of her own to fight for the throne. On May 3, 762, retired Emperor Shenzong passed away. When Emperor Suzong heard the news, he grieved, and his condition got worse. Left with no other options, Empress Zhang sent for the crown prince and told him that the eunuch Li Fuguo was the one who forced the retired emperor to move, that he was the one who caused the retired emperor to die, and that now he was plotting with the imperial guards to take out Emperor Suzong. If she could convince the crown prince to take out Li Fuguo, then they could form a new partnership, one where she could maintain her power. But Li Yu refused. He used his father's illness as an excuse, and said that killing Li Fuguo could aggravate his father's condition. So Empress Zheng turned to another prince, Li Xi, and told him, "The crown prince is kind and weak and cannot kill the treacherous ministers. Can you do it?" Li Xi was Emperor Suzong's second son and had the strongest claim to the throne after the crown prince. The empress promised Li Xi that she would depose the crown prince and help him to become the next emperor. In return, he would preserve her influence at court. Seeing one last chance to claim the throne, Li Xi agreed. They gathered a group of loyal eunuchs and armed them. On May 14th, Empress Zheng issued a forged order summoning the crown prince into the palace to see the sick emperor. But Li Fuguo discovered the plan, and he gathered his own supporters and soldiers and told the crown prince what had happened. But Li Yu could not believe it. They didn't have time to argue with him, so they forced him to go with them to the Fei Long stable and keep him under guard. Then they arrested Prince Li Xi and all of the officials that supported him. And then they went for the empress. Empress Zheng was hiding in the emperor's room, waiting for news from Prince Li Xi. And just like she did 6 years ago, she sat between her husband and the door. If someone came through that door, they would reach her first. Except this time, someone did come through that door. And they dragged her away. 2 days later, on May 16th, Emperor Suzong passed away in the Hall of Long Life. And later that same day, Prince Li Xi and the supporters of the failed succession struggle were all executed. 2 days later, Crown Prince Li Yu ascended the throne and would be known in history as Emperor Daizong. And then Empress Zheng died. But the exact manner and timing of her death are disputed. The old Book of Tang says that she died while in confinement. The new Book of Tang says that she was executed after being reduced to the status of a commoner. Later historical records say that she was executed along with Prince Li Xi or forced to take her own life. And the eunuch Li Fuguo, who had saved Emperor Daizong, did not last that much longer either. Instead, he was eventually demoted and removed from power. And 6 months later, assassins came into his house and killed him. After his death, the court gave him the posthumous name Chou, which means ugly. Today, Empress Zheng is mostly remembered only for her ambition. Later historians would criticize her for taking control of the court, similar to how Wu Zetian did. They will use her as an example of an imperial consort who overstepped, as an empress who weakened her husband's authority and introduced new instability through her own political ambitions. But in the chaos of a rebellion, when the Tang Dynasty had 2 emperors and no clear center of authority, it was Empress Zheng who helped to hold the fractured government together. She kept the court running and helped the empire to survive. Up to this point, women of the imperial family had repeatedly played leading roles in the politics of the Tang Dynasty. And after Empress Zheng, the empress no longer stood at the center of political power. Instead, for generations afterward, eunuchs would control the palace, influence successions, and sometimes even decide the fate of emperors themselves, which unfortunately contributed to the instability that followed the dynasty for the rest of its history. Empress Zheng would be the last empress with that much real power in the Tang Dynasty. In fact, many of the emperors of the Tang Dynasty after her would never name a living empress at all. But what if Empress Zheng had a son who became crown prince, just like Wu Zetian did? I wonder if things would have turned out very differently for the Tang Dynasty. What do you think about the life of Empress Zheng? Let me know in the comments. That's it for today's video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Stay curious, stay magical.